So 50 Shades of Grey is, of course, one of the most financially successful films of the year. Critically and from an audience perspective, it didn't receive the best reviews or the most hype. And I managed to watch the film just recently upon its home media release, and I wanted to understand, why I disliked the film, and also to some degree why the general audience dislikes the film. And upon really taking a step back and thinking about that, I've come to a couple of conclusions that, may not necessarily be 100% true, but in my eye, at least, are more reflective of my distaste towards the film. Perhaps you could relate to this in some form. Now, as you know, 50 Shades of Grey is a film about a wealthy businessman who engages sexually with a younger person, and of course there is a lot of BDSM and a lot of bondage and other things involved. And the thing is, I haven't read the book myself, but going into the film, I sort of knew that, and I think a lot of people in the audience did, whether they read the book or not. And that's sort of where the problem arises, or at least is in relation to the problem. It's fair for the audience to know some things while going into a film. There's trailers for a movie. There's, of course, a lot of pre-existing source material. There's things that are, in fact, assumed as public knowledge. But I'm going to use a quick example and sort of express why I think 50 Shades of Grey is as effortless as it really is, the reasoning behind that, for one, and also how that's sort of reflective, or possibly reflective, of some other franchise films today, and how it may be on the wrong side of presenting itself as a franchise film. Now, let's take a look at one of the biggest franchises today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, with the Avengers and everything, right? Is it fair to assume that the audience knows that there's a big green guy called the Hulk? I would say yes. Is it fair to assume that the audience knows that the guy with the shield that is red, white, and blue is Captain America? I would say yes. But you look beyond that, and you see any of these films, they don't make any further assumptions. They take the effort to really explain a lot of things, whether it's even stuff like the Infinity Stone, which might have been a whole added other scene in the film, say Age of Ultron. It still makes an effort to really, not spoon feed you, but allude to that demographic and portion of fans that might not be as familiar as some others. Similarly, you take a look at Furious 7, another one of the biggest films of the year. What assumptions does it make, apart from the fact that, sure, cars are fast and that's it? Like, beyond that, it doesn't make a lot of assumptions about what the viewer knows, and I think that is one of the biggest problems that 50 Shades of Grey has, and why it feels so effortless. It assumes that you know where the film is going. It assumes that almost every audience member going into the film is aware of the fact that this is going to be a very sexually intense experience between the two main characters. And even if that's all you know, sure, it's fair to assume that the audience knows that, but that doesn't mean that you can take that for granted, that you take your audience for granted, that, oh, my audience knows that this particular event is going to happen, therefore, for the first half of this film, I'm going to make little to no effort to build towards it. Because, take for example, in one of the first scenes when Mr. Grey meets the girl that he's going to engage with sexually, she bites her lip and whatnot. It's something that, in context of they are going to have sex eventually, it makes sense. However, in context of that scene, it feels very random and out of place. And I'm not saying it's wrong that the audience perhaps knows where the film is going to go, but I believe it is wrong on the filmmaker's part to assume that and to take that for granted. Assuming that is fair to some end, but to take it for granted and say, you know what, the audience knows is going to happen. The audience knows that they're going to make love and do all these fetish-related things, and therefore, you know what? We're just going to let it happen. We're just going to roll with it. We're just going to let the film play out as it would, and that's sort of what it felt like to me. And while 50 Shades of Grey, in my opinion, might not be the worst film out there, might have had some genuine moments of chemistry and tension, might have had a couple of moments of humor, actually, to be honest, I have to say that definitely for the first half of the film, at least, I felt offended to some end because, okay, sure, that while I have heard that the book, which I personally haven't read, and a lot of other viewers of this film have not read, to be honest, does sort of encourage submissive behavior. I don't think this film particularly did that and understood the mutuality of this relationship between the two characters. However, I felt offended at the fact that the film assumed that, yeah, sure, you know they're going to have sex, and you know that this is going to lead to something greater, some weird kind of relationship. So yeah, we're just gonna make these events that happen in the book just literally happen on screen. There's a bit of a translation that needs to occur from book to screen, which, again, as I can say, I haven't read the book. However, I feel if the book was such a success, there must be some kind of emotion behind it in some form or another, and I feel like that translation might not have occurred, might be one of the biggest problems of the film, because it feels like it's really just showing you event after event after event, making this a very awkward experience, making this an experience that within the context of you knowing where it's going sort of may potentially make sense, but really as a film, from one scene to the next, does not flow properly and feels very jarring in terms of where it goes, and made me feel uncomfortable to some end. And that is what I believe the biggest problem with 50 Shades of Grey is. Furthermore, to add to the whole concept of the franchise-related issues that 50 Shades of Grey seems to have, the ending of the film is very abrupt. Now, yes, there's going to be a sequel, and you see a lot of franchises today that already have sequels planned years in advance. That's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. But I will say one thing, that each of those films, take a look at Batman Begins, for example, the first film of the franchise of, the Dark Knight trilogy. It, yes, it does set up and plant a lot of seeds for a sequel with regards to the Joker and everything. However, does that mean you do not provide closure to the characters to some end? In that film, you see Bruce Wayne and Rachel sort of get together. He's going to rebuild his estate, and now he is the savior of Gotham City. Yes, that is the true ending of Batman Begins, and the arc and the storyline that was set up in that film, not the fact that he's going to fight the Joker. That's a minor seed planted for the future. You see this in a lot of films today, that, they plan for the future, but they don't forget the present, and I think that's something 50 Shades of Grey really forgot. It really forgot to end its own story, because it knows that you know that there's more, and it thinks that it can get away with that, and I, as a viewer, have to disagree, and I think that is one of the biggest problems that 50 Shades of Grey has. The assumptions that it makes in the audience mind are fair to some end, but to take those for granted and to take your very audience for granted is the biggest problem with 50 Shades of Grey.